Welcome to This Week in South Carolina. I'm Gavin Jackson. With over 4 months between now and the South Carolina Democratic presidential primary, candidates continue to visit the Palmetto State to gain support from the First in the South primary voters. According to the most recent Winthrop Poll, frontrunner Joe Biden continues to lead, but over 1/3 of participants are still undecided. South Carolina voters remain engaged and attentive to the still large field of Democratic candidates, though some candidates who have consistently polled low in the state continue to make minor incursions into the important early voting state that touts a diverse electorate that is critical to the Democratic Party. An electorate that polling shows is still strongly supporting former Vice President Joe Biden, who has deep connections to the state and name ID thanks to his 8 years serving President Barack Obama. Biden has maintained a 20-point-plus lead over candidates, but with proportional delegates in South Carolina, second place is still important in one area where Senator Elizabeth Warren has settled in the last 3 polls over Senator Bernie Sanders. But Warren has only recently ramped up her appearances in the state, which draw big crowds that are primarily white, an issue all candidates are having problems with in a state where 60% of the Democratic electorate is black. At a recent Warren rally, one voter summed up the field like this.
Because I think that Bernie's too old and Biden's too limited, and I think that a certain amount of dirt will stick to him even if it shouldn't. And we need every vote we can to make this cannot be a close election.
Despite a divided field, electability is one thing many Democrats can unite behind. 42% said the ability to beat President Donald Trump is more important than a candidate who shares their views. But there are still 4 months for voters to make up their minds and no shortage of candidates visiting the state. In fact, some 50% say they may change their minds before the February 29th primary. Joining us to look at the latest results of the Winthrop Poll is poll director and Winthrop political science professor Scott Huffmon. Scott, welcome back.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So we just got that poll done recently. Tell us a little bit of an overview about what you saw in the results. It surveyed not only Democrats but also Republicans, but kind of overall what we saw specifically in the Democratic field.
Sure. Let me back up a little bit on 2 instances. We sort of felt obligated to go into the field. We're the only South Carolina polling entity that's been named a threshold poll. And that means that in order to be allowed to participate in the Democratic presidential debates, you have to either raise certain amounts of money or get a certain threshold in named polls like Fox News, CNN, ours, Quinnipiac. And we hadn't done one, and so we felt a little guilty. So we kind of owed one, and we had to get it done by October 1st for it to, count for the October 15th debate. Mm-hmm. Now, backing up, if it's just about Democrats, why do we, poll some Republicans as well? And that has a lot to do with how we do things in South Carolina. We are open primary state. Technically, it's semi-open. You have to declare which one you're voting in. But that means we don't have data on who registered Democrats are because you don't register as a Democrat. Mm-hmm. So what we do know is who's registered to vote. We know all the demographics. So if we poll people who are registered to vote, and then ask them, are you Democrat, Republican, independent who leans, Democrat, Republican, we can then create a profile of what people who are registered but identify as Democrats look like. Mm. We have to do that first before we then can get any extra Democrats. So you can't just only poll people who voted in the last primary or whatever. You can supplement that, but only after you've screened the bloody entire registered voters and determined sort of that demographic. So because we also had some Republicans, we got to play around with a couple of extra questions. Mm-hmm. But so that's how we ended up getting a poll where we had enough Democrats from South Carolina who are voters to be able to say, okay, this is where it stands in South Carolina right now. And, as I think everybody knows right now, Joe Biden is, of course, well in the lead.
Mm-hmm. 37% Biden, 17% Warren, Sanders 8%, Senator Harris at 7%. And that's been pretty consistent for Joe Biden. Specifically here in South Carolina, he's maintained a 20-point-some average in these polls. Other states like Iowa and New Hampshire are a little bit closer. But again, he's kind of calling South Carolina his firewall, and it's looking like it is a true firewall at this point. Is that what the polling's reinforcing?
Actually, I think you're right. It will have to be. He will have to maintain that large lead here. And one of the primary reasons he has that lead is the African American vote. Again, this is why the first in the South primary matters so much. We look more like, our Democratic primary looks more like Democrats, and we're important for Republicans because our Republican primary looks more like national Republicans. So think of who core Democratic supporters are nationally, right? Now, in the census, Latinos, Hispanics are now larger nationally than African Americans, but African Americans vote Democratic to the tune of 90%, whereas Hispanics and Latinos goes up and down. It's certainly not near 90. So African Americans are a core constituency. And of course liberal whites. And if you're white and a Democrat in South Carolina these days, you're likely to be a little more liberal. So by coming to South Carolina, you are really looking at the people you have to get to support you, but B, have to excite in order to win nationally. So in Iowa, it's 97% white. Joe Biden's, has a lot more competition. New Hampshire, again, totally different. Coming down here, what matters the most is who women and African Americans support. Women will make up over 60% of the presidential primary. African Americans make up over 60%. Black women are actually the crown jewel of the Democratic presidential primary. So, because of his association with Obama, he's a known entity and he's trusted. Now, if you think back to Biden's, past, 1988, when he's, using British politician Neil Kinnock's biography of his own and plagiarizing, and the Anita Hill stuff, and all, and even in 2007 when he's running against Barack Obama, calling him clean and articulate, that not so much. He has been reinvented in the mind of African American voters as the loyal supporter of Barack Obama. So he comes into this with name recognition and trust among black voters. How much of that can be eroded by his opponents is another question. So as he comes in, he starts off overwhelmingly ahead in South Carolina. Trust is very important to African American voters in South Carolina. If you look at, hey, what's more important, somebody who shares your views or can beat Trump? Liberal whites beat Trump. I just want to beat Trump. African Americans, it's more evenly split because they want to know it's somebody they can believe in. And right now, because of the imprimatur of Obama, that's Joe Biden. That can be whittled away at, but that's going to take time. We're still 5 months out. And at this point in 2007, Hillary Clinton was Hillary Clinton was sizably ahead of Barack Obama.
And just kind of talking about that, we'll definitely go back to the role that South Carolina plays in those kind of tiebreakers and the precedent we set. But I'm wondering, when you look at these other candidates in the race, I've been in all these press gaggles with these candidates, and the number one question from South Carolina reporters is always about the black vote.
Sure.
We know it's not monolithic. It's obviously split, but there's a lot up for grabs there. And I'm just wondering, when these candidates see just how well Joe Biden has consistently been doing in South Carolina, do they still have to keep throwing everything they can at South Carolina? I mean, how much more do you keep investing in a state where it's kind of maybe clear that there's a favorite here, or do you keep hoping that things might change? There could be some sort of movement out of Iowa that could help project them in South Carolina, or there could be any number of things happening that could make them more viable in the future.
Well, it's the strategy depends on which tier you're in, really. And South Carolina can be, I think, the final hope for some of those, especially low but mid-tier candidates. So Kamala Harris's support in South Carolina basically has doubled. Now it's still single digits, right? But it's basically doubled. And so that's showing that, okay, folks are beginning to get to know who she is. A lot of outsiders like, why aren't the two, these two black candidates, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, why aren't they getting more support? And again, it's, as you pointed out, black voters are not monolithic, and they don't just vote for somebody because they're also black. That's not, they're very sophisticated voters as anybody else. And so these people have to get known, and Kamala Harris is getting more known among African American voters. So this can be a strategy for her that once her name recognition starts going up and awareness starts going up, if she can kind of get into that top tier after Iowa and maybe New Hampshire, that could begin to change things. Now, some of the others are only going to have a chance to barely hang in. Tulsi Gabbard has spent a good bit of money down here, and it has not paid off in the way you thought. So, folks like us who are paying attention, watching it, it's like, okay, we have not seen a third-tier candidate spending this much money in a state. We've seen signs where we didn't expect them, billboards, has not paid off. And honestly, I was surprised. I thought, look, at this stage, it's name recognition, and this is getting name recognition. Well, apparently Tom Steyer is doing a better job of that because, if I'm in South Carolina and open up YouTube, I see a Tom Steyer ad. Right now, if I'm out of state, it's different. So apparently, he's found a better way to get some name recognition.
And do you think that's probably from his need to impeach ads that he had been rolling out before he was even a candidate versus some other candidates who are lower tier? Because he really has. A poll after your poll, the Fox News poll, showed him at 4%, which was tied with I think Kamala Harris too. So he's really changed. He's really upped his game after just announcing in August essentially, and he's kind of coming for these other campaigns.
And I think you're right. I think that those are the reasons. People saw those ads, they saw that name, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, I know that name, which goes back to the point that at this stage it's not singularly name recognition anymore like it was a couple months ago, but the residue of name recognition is there. I think especially as Elizabeth Warren pushes her new strategy, focusing on not just African American, but African American women stronger, we might see some pulling away. And depending on concerns over Bernie Sanders' health, among whites, we might see some of the progressive whites moving from Bernie to Warren.
And just kind of sticking with Elizabeth Warren, she was actually up in your neck of the woods in Rock Hill the other day. Big crowd, big turnout. It was her first time doing a campaign event in South Carolina for some 40 days. So it was kind of interesting to see how she took her time to come back to South Carolina, especially if there's such support for her. And she is number 2 in your poll there. But I'm wondering, I saw a tweet from Bakari Sellers, who was with Kamala Harris's campaign, saying, she's doing the Bernie Sanders 2016 strategy, where you're getting these big crowds, but you're parachuting in, and you're not really engaging the people on the ground as much. So do you think that's the case, or do you think that maybe they're trying to organize more? I mean, we have 5 months. You really kind of have to have that ground game ready to go should you come out of Iowa hot or New Hampshire hot.
Right, and I think she is building a ground game a little more quietly with staff. Bakari, he has his reasons for doing it. Obviously, he's not necessarily wrong in that's somewhat of what she's been doing, as opposed to more just sort of pounding the earth and in every tiny little small hamlet. When you look at Rock Hill, every candidate eventually comes through Winthrop, but they also always choose at one point for the Democrats. Now, we get all the candidates of all parties, but the Democrats always stop by the largest black church and often stop at where she stopped, Clinton Junior College, which is African American. But did you notice the crowd?
Predominantly white.
It was overwhelmingly
like so many
white.
other candidates have been, yes.
That's exactly right. And so you look at her numbers, the difference between white Democrats and black Democrats, and her support among whites is so much higher than it is among African Americans. She's got to change that. Otherwise, that's the thing that Bernie saw. Bernie saw, all these campaigns in South Carolina where they would just be overwhelmingly things. Well, okay, fine, but 2,000 people, when hundreds of thousands are going to vote, doesn't make a difference. And plus, half of them would have license plates from North Carolina or from Georgia. And what did he get stomped by 70 points? I mean, so that is the parachuting in doesn't win, but if you have a ground game and you start focusing your message, Bernie thought that his message would simply play to African Americans. Well, of course, they'll just jump on my message like my Bernie bros did. That's not the case. It's trust. Trust and message have to go hand in glove.
And do you think people also aren't paying attention yet still? I mean, it's everywhere. There's so much going on in the news cycle. Do you think people, I mean, you have a nice Saturday in October. Are you going to go to a rally?
What else is going on in the news cycle? There's something else that might be taking up.
Just a few things, Scott, day to day.
Right.
But I'm just wondering, it's going to be, we see that bump after Labor Day. It's going to be colder and people will probably be indoors more. They might be watching TV more. They might start paying attention. But I'm just thinking, I go to a lot of these different rallies and crowds are all predominantly white for the most part for all the candidates, it seems like. Even Joe Biden, even though he has the highest black vote support, I'm just wondering, is it just people, hey, I'm paying attention from afar, I'm just not getting to these rallies per se?
If you look at these rallies, not only are they, we can see they're overwhelmingly white. I would guarantee if we were to actually, poll them, the ones there, there would be disproportionately higher education, disproportionately higher income. These are, in general, the richer, more liberal, more educated among the Democrats, right? I mean, you got. Let's be honest. The working class white Democrats are out of job that day. So
I mean, it's the middle of the day sometimes. People are working.
They don't necessarily represent the folks who are going to come out. So it may look like a huge crowd, but it's not really the same crowd who's going to actually vote. So your point is correct that the people who are truly going to vote, a lot of them are just stretching up those antennae now to start receiving the signals of who is there and what they're saying. So we're just now getting to the point beyond name recognition.
Yeah, and I kind of want to stick with that too and get to some other things, but I want to add that 52% of the people you guys surveyed said they might change their mind come February 29th. So yeah, strong numbers, but half of them are thinking, hey, I might change my mind. So I mean, that's a nice little curveball there, and it probably gives a lot of those other candidates hope that, hey, we can work on these people, right?
You've always got one consultant whose entire income depends on this guy who's pointing to that number. They're all going to switch to you.
Need that job.
You got to remember that 52% who could change their mind, a chunk won't, and of the rest who do are going to go in many different directions. But if you are those third-tier candidates, you have to hope that you're the one who's going to pick them up, which back to a question you asked earlier, why keep spending money here? That's why. That's going to get you into the debates on the stage and get you in the debates so that come Iowa, you'll do better. Right? So again, it's which strategy of how much money and how to direct it in South Carolina depends on what tier you're in.
And Scott, just to jump into the debates, we have seen the field get smaller. This upcoming debate, there's going to be 12 candidates on stage Tuesday, October 15th. There's going to be 8 that didn't make the cut. So is this a better approach, you think, having these requirements, these polling requirements, fundraising requirements to get on these stages to help maybe whittle the field and help kind of concentrate the message for people?
Well, I mean, whether it's better or not, I'm not partisan, so I'm not sure internally whether it's helping them or not. I do know as an observer, it's, having a cacophony of people up there who at the best moment can only get in a quip and, and a phrase or, a bad statement, and get hurt by it. That doesn't give us any information. It doesn't get to show off the way they intellectually can work through a question and come to, okay, this is what the policy I would have and why. You get a few seconds to say something pithy that you hope voters remember. You're hoping it's the I knew Jack Kennedy, you're no Jack Kennedy. You're hoping to recreate that, but it's just a mess to watch. And
so what are you going to be watching for then?
Well,
on Tuesday,
it depends on whether I'm alone or with friends. So one time I had a group of friends over and we were watching it, and I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen Mystery Science Theater 3000, but we were just hurtling. What are you thinking? What are you because there's very little of substance. However, the attack lines, while unpleasant to watch, are always important to watch. That tells you who each candidate thinks is the biggest threat or who they think they can peel the most voters from. So looking at the lines of attack, obviously they're going to be against the front runners, right? Obviously Joe Biden's going to be, just in everybody's sights. But how they choose to go after the people who are also in their tier is really important. And going after like the Warren and the Sanders, the tacks they choose to take tells you where they think policy-wise they can peel support from. With 12 people on stage, there's still just not going to be a lot you can do.
And then, fast forwarding to the primary February 29th here in South Carolina, a lot of these candidates seem like they'll have enough money to make it to that primary. So I'm thinking we're going to have a couple people on our ballot, especially when you look at the third quarter numbers with Bernie Sanders bringing in 25 million, Warren 24.6, Buttigieg 19.1, Biden 15.2, and Harris 11.6. All that in the millions. And I'm just wondering that's strong third quarter numbers for a lot of those people, especially Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who again is kind of like this phenomenon on the stage right now. But when you have Joe Biden at kind of, what is he in fourth right there in fundraising, is that worrisome when you have a front runner, at least in South Carolina, who's really hammering home, but then not maybe getting the fundraising that needs to support it?
What does the money buy? In
advertising and all that
name
good
recognition.
stuff. Yeah, you don't.
So, basically you can imagine he doesn't have to spend a dime on name recognition, whereas Pete Buttigieg does. I mean, most people have trouble pronouncing Buttigieg right now, right? Nobody has problems saying Biden.
Joe Biden,
It's Uncle Joe.
But then I'm guessing,
people.
maybe counter messaging for what the Trump campaigns going to be thrown at him just based on Ukraine and impeachment and stuff like that.
Right, but that's sort of earned media for him. To his base, it just looks like, they're trying to make up anything because they're afraid. So even that is not necessarily hurting him, although his opponents are going to go at this saying he's weak. He has things Trump could attack on, I don't. So, the fundraising, it'd be better if he had more, always, but I don't think it's immediately worrisome for him because Pete Buttigieg has to have more so that people know who he is. Biden doesn't have to buy that. So as it goes on, Biden easily can stay in through South Carolina, right? Buttigieg needs to do well in Iowa, and he will. He'll do better in Iowa than he's doing right now in South Carolina. He'll do better where there's more liberal whites, in Iowa, in New Hampshire, and he needs that momentum to do better in South Carolina than he's doing now.
And we have less than 5 minutes left, but I want to talk about winning South Carolina. Can you come in second place, third place in South Carolina and still be viable, depending, I guess, maybe how you did in Iowa and New Hampshire, or is it pretty much lights out?
No. Again, because especially if there's a lot of people in, the proportional nature of the Democratic primary, where even if you lose, you get some delegates, you can, come in second, and begin to build. And as long as you have some super strong showings later on, right, especially as there's attrition of the final folks, the folks that come in 20th each time, then you can begin to build delegates over and above that first place. So you're not out. And in fact, sometimes coming in second can make you a champion. Bill Clinton was called the comeback kid because of New Hampshire. He did not win New Hampshire. He came in second. And so what it was coming from so far behind all the way up to second. And again, in a lot of the Republican primaries, it's winner take all. So second place is the same as 12th place. It doesn't matter. It's not the case in most of the Democratic.
If you're not first, you're last, right?
Yeah, for the Republicans, absolutely.
And just kind of look at that. And then also Bernie Sanders had a heart attack recently, but also had on the same day had these massive numbers coming out. What are we going to be watching for in Bernie Sanders? I mean, will polling dictate maybe how he goes forward? Do you think that could hurt him if people all of a sudden say maybe he won't be as strong of a candidate at 78 years old with health issues?
Two things. Maybe. I think it makes them more aware of the age thing. But then the question is, if they're more concerned about the age thing, how does that affect both Biden and Warren, who are, I believe, all in their 70s? And then second, it's sort of, okay, if I still support Bernie, wow, I'm really concerned about his vice president, to be honest. So that might change things up a little bit. I don't think Bernie sees a problem with his messaging, and I know his core supporters don't. And so I don't see him changing that much up. Whereas Elizabeth Warren, I think, has learned, especially from Obama in 2007, messaging in South Carolina has to go in certain directions in certain ways. She seems to be starting to change that up. We'll see if she follows through, but other than Bernie maybe having some photo ops of I don't know, lifting weights, jumping, whatever he's going to do to prove he's in good health, I don't see him changing his strategy that much.
And just 30 seconds left. What are you watching for the next few months until we have you back on the show here in South Carolina? What are we looking out for?
First off, can Biden's lead in South Carolina among African Americans be eaten in as people get name recognition for other candidates and their message? Where does Kamala Harris go, and what's happening with Cory Booker, especially if you're not going to come to South Carolina and eat barbecue?
So much to look at, and we didn't even talk about Republicans or their primary or Mark Sanford or Lindsey Graham. So we're going to have to wait till next year, hopefully. Maybe this fall, we'll see. Scott, thank you so much for joining us this week. And thank you for joining us. Also, check out the South Carolina Lead. It's a political podcast that can be found on your podcast app on any mobile device. Each week, I recap the weekly political news with the reporters who cover it. From the Kennedy Greenhouse studio on the campus of the University of South Carolina, I'm Gavin Jackson.